It was one of those nights when the city seemed to breathe a little slower, the air thick with a steady drizzle that blurred the neon lights into soft, glowing halos. Keanu Reeves walked the familiar streets of downtown Los Angeles, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his black leather jacket. The street was mostly empty, save for the occasional car passing by, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Keanu enjoyed these quiet walks, a moment to himself after a long day of rehearsals. The sound of his boots tapping against the pavement was the only thing breaking the silence, and it was a welcome contrast to the constant noise of Hollywood life. But tonight was different. Something in the air felt off. As he rounded the corner of a dimly lit street, a motorcycle's engine roared to life behind him. The sudden sound shattered the peace, and Keanu instinctively glanced over his shoulder. A gang of bikers, all dressed in black leather, revved their engines as they pulled into the street ahead of him. Their presence, heavy and menacing, cut through the air like a blade. "Great," Keanu muttered to himself, his calm demeanor never wavering. He had been in more dangerous situations before, but this wasn't just a random group of rowdy riders. The look in their eyes, the tension in their posture, made it clear that they were up to no good. One of the bikers, the leader, with a scruffy beard and a scar running down his cheek, eyed Keanu with a sneer as they slowed down to a stop in front of him. "Well, well," the man drawled, his voice thick with disdain. "Look who we have here, Mr. Hollywood himself, out for a late-night stroll. You lost, pal?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just out for a walk," he replied, his gaze steady as he sized up the group. "No trouble." The leader chuckled, clearly amused. "No trouble, huh? This is our turf, buddy. And you're just going to walk right through it?" Keanu's instincts told him to stay calm, to not escalate things. He had been in enough situations to know that words were sometimes the best weapon, but these guys weren't the type to listen. The rest of the bikers were starting to circle him, their faces hidden behind helmets and dark sunglasses. The tension was palpable. "Listen," Keanu said, his voice still calm but with a firm edge. "I don't want any trouble. You're welcome to have the street. Just let me pass." The gang leader wasn't buying it. He took a step forward, his boots thudding heavily on the wet pavement. "See, the problem with you Hollywood types," he sneered, "is that you think you can just walk through life without consequences." He jabbed a finger in Keanu's direction. "You think your pretty face and fancy moves can save you here." Keanu's heart rate didn't increase. His years of training, his discipline, helped him keep his cool in moments like this. He knew it. Wasn't about his acting career or his fame, or even how many martial arts belts he held. It was about respect, and these guys didn't know what that meant. "You don't want to do this," Keanu said quietly, his eyes never leaving the gang leader's face. His voice was calm, almost too calm for someone surrounded by aggression. "It won't end well for you." The leader laughed, the sound low and menacing. He motioned to his gang. "Did you hear that, boys? He's going to teach us a lesson in respect." Before Keanu could react, one of the bikers lunged toward him. It was quick, and it was clear they weren't looking to talk anymore. But Keanu was ready. With a fluid motion, he sidestepped the biker, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back. The man grunted in pain as Keanu pushed him to the ground in one swift movement. The others hesitated for a split second, surprised by the speed and precision of the move. But that hesitation was enough. "Stay down," Keanu muttered, his voice low. He turned his attention back to the gang leader, who now seemed less amused and more cautious. "Nice move," the leader growled, his hand subtly going to the knife strapped to his belt. "But you've made a mistake, pal. Now you're going to pay for it." It was one of those nights when the city seemed to breathe a little slower, the air thick with a steady drizzle that blurred the neon lights into soft, glowing halos. Keanu Reeves walked the familiar streets of downtown Los Angeles, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his black leather jacket. The street was mostly empty, save for the occasional Keanu's eyes flickered to the knife, his muscles tensing. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew how quickly things could escalate. He had to stay ahead, stay in control. But there was something about this group, their energy, their desperation, that made him rethink his options. This wasn't just a simple confrontation. It felt personal, like they were looking for a fight, no matter the cost. For a brief moment everything felt suspended, the rain falling in slow motion, as the gang leader took a step closer. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a voice cut through the air, loud and clear. "Hey, is there a problem here?" Keanu turned to see a figure standing at the end of the alleyway, silhouetted by the streetlights. A figure he didn't expect, an old friend, a former colleague who was now standing there, arms crossed, ready to back him up. The bikers froze, momentarily, distracted by the unexpected intervention. Keanu's gaze softened for just a moment. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this fight, but the leader wasn't backing down. "What do you want, friend?" he barked, his grip tightening on the knife. Keanu's hand subtly shifted to a defensive stance, his mind already calculating the best course of action. The night was far from over, and this was only the beginning. The rain fell harder now, turning the alley into a slick, glistening trap. Keanu glanced at his old friend, Jack, standing at the mouth of the alley. Jack was a former Marine, and though he had long since retired from the service, his presence carried a weight that made even the most hardened criminals pause. But it wasn't just Jack's stature that made the bikers hesitate. It was his calm, unwavering gaze. There was no fear there, just a quiet certainty that made Keanu feel like he wasn't alone anymore. But the bikers didn't retreat. Instead, the gang leader, still holding that gleaming knife, smirked, sizing up Jack. "You've got yourself a friend, huh?" the leader sneered. "Is he gonna fight your battles for you now?" Keanu felt the tension in the air thicken, but he knew better than to let the situation spiral out of control. He couldn't afford to let his emotions take over. The leader's arrogance, the way he puffed out his chest like he was the one in control, it was all a show, a desperate attempt to make themselves feel bigger than they were. Jack's voice broke through the silence. "We don't want trouble," he said, his tone firm but calm. "But if it's trouble you're after, you'll get it." The gang leader's eyes flashed. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten us? This is our turf." Keanu didn't flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the leader, reading him, analyzing him. There was a crack in his confidence, a subtle shift that told Keanu everything he needed to know. This wasn't a battle of strength, it was a battle of control, of respect, and the bikers were losing it. A low growl came from one of the bikers, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms. He took a step forward, swinging his fists like he was ready to throw down. Keanu knew it was coming. The bikers were no longer in the mood for talking. The energy in the alley shifted. What had started as a verbal confrontation was rapidly escalating into something more dangerous. Before the biker could land a punch, Keanu was already moving. He sidestepped the swing, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The biker grunted in pain, his face turning red as Keanu expertly took him to the ground. He barely made a sound, just a thud as his body hit the wet pavement. Jack moved in, positioning himself between the rest of the gang and Keanu, ready to back him up. "We don't want this to get ugly," he said to the remaining bikers, his voice like a steel blade. "But we will defend ourselves if it comes to that." The bikers paused, looking at each other in disbelief. Keanu stood, steady as ever, wiping the rain from his face. He wasn't just defending himself now, he was showing them who was in control. The leader's eyes flickered with uncertainty, a crack in his bravado. "You think you've won?" the gang leader spat. "We're not going anywhere." "You're making a mistake, buddy." Keanu's calm didn't falter. "No mistake," he said, his voice low. "You made the mistake when you decided to start a fight with the wrong people." Jack let out a small sigh, glancing at Keanu. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Just let us walk away. Nobody needs to get hurt." But the bikers were no longer listening. Their pride had been wounded, and they weren't backing down now. The gang leader motioned for the remaining bikers to circle in, each one sizing up Keanu, and Jack like a pack of wolves about to close in for the kill. Keanu's mind raced, calculating their moves. He was outnumbered, sure, but he had the advantage of training. Years of martial arts had taught him that strength wasn't just about size, it was about focus, about control, and in this moment, Keanu had both. One of the bikers lunged at Jack, but Keanu was already there. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it in a perfect arc before flipping him onto the ground. The thug let out a yelp as he slammed into the wet concrete, and Keanu was already moving to the next target, a fluid blur of motion. Jack, for his part, was no slouch. His years of military training kicked in, and he dropped one of the remaining bikers with a well-placed punch to the gut. The man crumpled to the ground with a wheeze, unable to catch his breath. Keanu and Jack worked in sync, moving like a well-oiled machine. Every strike was precise, every movement calculated. They had been in battles before, but this felt different. There was no more talking, no more negotiations. This was pure survival. But then, as Keanu took down another biker with a swift kick to the chest, he felt the unmistakable weight of a knife at his back. The gang leader had made his move. "You're not walking away from this," the leader snarled, pressing the blade against Keanu's spine. "This is your last chance. Stand down." Keanu's body tensed. The situation had escalated beyond anything he had anticipated. He had a knife at his back, and the gang leader was pushing his luck. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was life or death. And that's when Keanu realized something. He wasn't just facing a physical threat, he was facing a test of his own resolve. It wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about controlling the situation, about holding on to his principles in the face of violence. He could feel the cool steel against his skin, but his mind was clear. The situation wasn't hopeless yet. "Your move," Keanu said softly, just loud enough for the gang leader to hear. The leader, confused by his calm, hesitated for a moment, and in that split second, Keanu reacted. He twisted his body, dropping low and spinning to the side. The knife missed him by inches, and Keanu was on his feet in an instant. He grabbed the leader's arm, twisting it with the precise force of a practiced martial artist. The knife clattered to the ground as Keanu applied a pressure point, rendering the leader's arm useless. With one final move, Keanu forced the leader to the ground, disarming him completely. The rest of the bikers, now witnessing their leader in defeat, stopped in their tracks. The fight had turned, and it was clear that Keanu wasn't backing down. Breathing heavily, Keanu stepped back, his body poised in a defensive stance. The key: bikers were no longer aggressive. They were defeated, stunned into silence. Jack stood next to him, his eyes scanning the remaining bikers, waiting for any sign of resistance. But none came. "Get up," Keanu said to the gang leader, his voice calm but firm. "You're leaving, now." The leader, face red with anger, grimaced but nodded, slowly rising to his feet. The rest of the bikers followed suit, their posture slumped in defeat. They turned, walking away without another word. Keanu and Jack watched them disappear into the night, the rain still falling steadily around them. The tension in the air began to ease, and Keanu exhaled deeply. "You're not bad in a fight," Jack said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Keanu gave him a small smile. "I've had practice." But even as they walked away, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time he'd faced something like this, and in the back of his mind, he wondered just who had sent those bikers after him in the first place. The night air was heavy with the scent of wet pavement and dampened city sounds as Keanu and Jack walked side by side, their footsteps echoing faintly through the alley. The encounter with the bikers had left them both on edge, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The fight had been intense, but Keanu knew this wasn't just some random group looking to cause trouble. The bikers had been too organized, too focused. There was something larger at play here, something that didn't add up. "So what do you think?" Jack asked, his voice low but filled with curiosity. That didn't feel like just some random gang. They were looking for something. Keanu's eyes scanned the shadows as they walked, his mind still processing the details of the fight. His body was sore, but it wasn't the physical ache that bothered him. It was the nagging sense that this wasn't over. "I think you're right," Keanu replied, his tone calm, but his mind was racing. "Those bikers weren't just out to start trouble. They were on a mission, but who sent them and why me?" Jack gave him a knowing look. "You've got a lot of enemies, Keanu. Hollywood isn't as glamorous as they make it seem. And you've made some powerful people nervous in the past. Could be someone from your past looking to settle a score." Keanu nodded, considering the possibility. He had been in the public eye for years, and in that time he had made his fair share of enemies. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this attack was personal, that whoever was behind it knew exactly who he was and what he could do. They turned the corner and walked into a small, inconspicuous bar. Keanu had been here a few times before, a place where the noise of the world faded into the background. It was quiet, hidden from the hustle and bustle of the city, and just the kind of place they could talk without being interrupted. As they sat at a corner booth, Keanu leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I need to find out who's behind this. It doesn't make sense. This whole thing feels like a setup." Jack's brow furrowed. "A setup? What do you mean?" "I don't think they were just trying to scare me," Keanu explained. "They weren't just some random bikers looking to pick a fight. This was planned. And the way they acted, like they knew exactly where I'd be and when. Something's not right." Jack took a long sip from his drink, his eyes narrowing. "You think someone wants to send you a message?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah, but who? I haven't pissed anyone off recently, or at least no one who would go this far, but there's always someone in the shadows." Jack leaned back in his seat, his eyes scanning the bar before settling back on Keanu. "Well, whoever it is, they might be thinking they've got you rattled. But the way you handled those bikers, you didn't even break a sweat. Whoever is behind this is going to have to rethink their strategy." Keanu smiled slightly, appreciating Jack's confidence, but the feeling that this was just the beginning lingered in his mind. Before he could speak again, the door to the bar creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. At first, Keanu didn't pay much attention, just another person coming in out of the rain. But something about the figure made him pause. The man's gait was purposeful, his posture stiff but confident, like someone who didn't want to be noticed, but knew exactly where he was going. Keanu's instincts immediately kicked in. The man's eyes swept the room, and when they landed on Keanu, something flickered in his expression. Just a momentary flash, but enough for Keanu to notice. "Jack," Keanu murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something's off." Jack followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing when he spotted the man. "Do you know him?" Keanu shook his head, but the unease in his gut grew. The man approached the bar with deliberate steps, ordering a drink without acknowledging anyone. But Keanu had seen that type of behavior before. It was the way someone acted when they were looking for something, or someone. After a few moments of silence, the man turned and walked toward their booth. He wasn't making a move to sit, but his presence was undeniable. Keanu's instincts flared, his hand resting casually near the table, just in case. "You two look like you've had a long night," the man said smoothly, his voice calm, but with an edge that made Keanu's muscles tense. "Mind if I join you for a drink?" Jack's eyes flicked to Keanu, and the two exchanged a silent, understanding look. It was a moment of hesitation, but neither of them was in the mood to back down. "Sure," Keanu said, his tone casual but laced with caution. "What's your name?" The man smiled, an almost predatory smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Victor," he said, lowering himself into the seat opposite Keanu. "I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu's eyebrow arched slightly. "Really? And what have you heard?" Victor's eyes gleamed as he leaned in slightly. "Oh, I've heard all about the martial artist, the tough guy with a black belt in karate. You know, the one who's good at getting out of tight spots." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And I've also heard you're someone who doesn't like being pushed around. I admire that." Keanu's gaze remained steady, his expression unreadable. "And what's your point, Victor?" The man smiled again, his tone shifting from playful to cold. "My point is simple. You're not just an actor, Mr. Reeves. You're someone who's been involved in things, dangerous things. And that doesn't go unnoticed, does it?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not sure I follow." Victor's smile faded, replaced by something more calculating. "Let's just say I've got some business interests in the area, and someone like you, well, you're bound to make enemies whether you know it or not." Keanu's heart rate remained steady, but his mind was spinning. This wasn't some casual conversation. There was something beneath the surface, something Victor wasn't saying. Jack's voice broke the tension. "And what exactly is it you want, Victor? We've got no interest in whatever business you're peddling." Victor's eyes flicked to Jack, his lips twitching into a half-smile. "I'm just here to pass along a message. Consider this a warning." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you keep digging into this, Mr. Reeves, you might find out more than you're ready for. And that would be unfortunate." With that, Victor stood up, his movements smooth and deliberate. "Think about it," he said, his words hanging in the air like a threat. "You don't want to make the wrong enemies. Trust me." Keanu watched him leave, the door swinging, shut behind him with a soft thud. The tension in the room lingered, thick and oppressive. Jack exhaled slowly. "You're right. This is only the beginning." Keanu didn't respond right away. His mind was already racing, processing Victor's words. Whoever was behind this had just made it clear. They weren't playing around anymore, and they had no intention of letting Keanu off easy. The silence in the bar was deafening. The air felt thick, as if the entire room was holding its breath. After Victor's departure, Keanu's eyes were still fixed on the door, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. Who was Victor, and what did he really want? His cryptic warning, along with the way he spoke about Keanu's past, made it clear that this wasn't just a random encounter. Jack, sensing the tension, slid out of the booth and reached for his coat. "We need to get out of here. This place doesn't feel right anymore." Keanu nodded, his instincts telling him that sticking around could only lead to more trouble. "Let's go. We'll talk somewhere else." They made their way to the door, but Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they stepped into the rain-soaked street, the weight of the conversation hung over them like a storm cloud. Keanu's mind was still racing. Through the exchange with Victor, something about it felt like a setup, like Victor had known exactly what to say to rattle him. And the worst part? Keanu didn't know who was pulling the strings from the shadows. They walked in silence while the rain falling in a steady, relentless rhythm. The city was alive around them, but it felt distant, like they were in a bubble separated from the world. Jack broke the silence first, his voice low. "Keanu, this is serious. I've been in situations like this before. If Victor's involved, it's not just some random guy with a grudge. This guy has connections, and those connections, they don't mess around." Keanu's jaw tightened, his mind already shifting to the next phase. He couldn't let this go. Whoever was behind Victor's cryptic message wasn't just playing with fire. They were starting a fire that Keanu would have to put out. "I know," Keanu said, his voice steady, but beneath it there was an edge of determination. "But we don't know enough yet. We need to find out who's really behind this." Jack gave him a skeptical look. "And how do you plan to do that? You've already got bikers after you, and now some shadowy figure wants to warn you. What's next? The longer you dig, the deeper you'll get. And it'll get a lot worse before it gets better." Keanu looked up at the skyline, the lights of the city flickering through the rain. "I'm not backing down, Jack. Whoever's doing this is looking for something. I'm going to make sure they don't get it." Jack sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "You've always been stubborn, you know that?" Keanu gave him a faint smile. "It's gotten me this far," as they rounded a corner and headed towards Keanu's car. A black SUV pulled up beside them, its headlights blinding them for a moment. The door of the vehicle opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, his expression as cold as the rain. Keanu recognized him immediately. He had seen him around before, but never in a situation like this. "Mr. Reeves," the man said in a clipped tone. "We need to talk." Keanu's muscles tensed, his hand instinctively going to the pocket where he kept a small but well-practiced folding knife. "And you are?" The man didn't flinch. "My name is Ryan. I'm here on behalf of the people who want to see this situation resolved." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "What situation?" Ryan's lips curled into a slight smile, but it wasn't friendly. "The one involving Victor, the bikers, and the misunderstandings that have occurred. You see, Mr. Reeves, you've gotten on the wrong side of some very powerful people, and they've sent me to offer you a choice." Keanu stood tall, his posture firm. "I don't take orders." Ryan's smile didn't falter. "I didn't think you would. But let me make it clear. We can either handle this the easy way or the hard way. But make no mistake, Mr. Reeves, this is bigger than you think. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jack stepped forward, standing next to Keanu, his eyes hard. If you think we're just going to roll over because you say so, you're mistaken. This isn't how things are done around here. Ryan's gaze shifted slightly, sizing up Jack before turning back to Keanu. I'm just here to deliver the message. You're being warned. The people I represent don't like to be crossed. You can walk away from this or you can keep pushing, but either way, the consequences are the same. Keanu's mind was already spinning, analyzing every word Ryan said. Who were these people? What did they want with him? And why was he being targeted so ruthlessly? You're wasting your time, Keanu said, his voice cool but edged with determination. I don't respond to threats. Ryan's eyes hardened. That's your choice, Mr. Reeves. Just remember, you were warned. Without another word, Ryan turned and walked back to the SUV, which pulled away into the rain-drenched night. Keanu and Jack stood there for a moment, the tension in the air palpable. Who the hell are these people? Jack muttered under his breath, frustration clear in his voice. Keanu's gaze remained fixed on the disappearing vehicle. I don't know, but I intend to find out. As they continued their walk to the car, the weight of the situation pressed down on Keanu. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for answers. Someone was pulling the strings, orchestrating this entire game. And if Keanu was going to put a stop to it, he needed to get to the heart of the operation, before it was too late. Keanu's mind was a whirlwind. Each moment seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding this latest chapter of his life. It wasn't just a random gang or an unlucky encounter. This was something orchestrated. There were players in the shadows, players he didn't know but who certainly knew him. He could feel the weight of it on his shoulders, pressing down harder with every step, but he wasn't going to back off. No, he would get to the bottom of this, even if it meant confronting the very people who wanted him silenced. The rain still drizzled as Keanu and Jack made their way toward his car. The city felt like a different place now, a place full of enemies. Lurking just out of sight, Keanu could feel the prickle of eyes on him, even though no one was around. It was a sensation he knew all too well, the awareness that there were forces at work, things moving in the dark that could pull him in without him even realizing it. The fight with the bikers hadn't just been some isolated event, it was part of something bigger. And now Ryan's cryptic warning had only confirmed that suspicion. Keanu climbed into his car, Jack getting into the passenger seat. The engine hummed to life, but there was no sense of comfort in the familiar noise. Keanu wasn't sure where they were headed next. He only knew they had to keep moving, keep searching. Where to? Jack asked, glancing over at Keanu. Keanu's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles going white. We need to get to a friend of mine, someone who can help us figure out who's pulling the strings behind all of this. Jack raised an eyebrow. Who? Her name's Maria. She's a former intelligence officer. She knows how to dig into people's pasts, find the connections others miss. Keanu shifted gears, turning onto a quieter street. If anyone can help us figure out who's behind these attacks, it's her. As the car sped through the rain-slicked streets, Keanu's thoughts kept returning to Victor and Ryan. The way they had spoken to him, the way they had already made it clear that they were in control, was unsettling. They didn't seem like ordinary thugs or gangsters. These were men with purpose, men who knew how to manipulate and control, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Keanu knew he had to find out who they were. But even more than that, he needed to know why he was being targeted. He wasn't just some random actor in the wrong place at the wrong time. There had to be more to this, and Keanu was determined to find the answers. It didn't take long to reach Maria's apartment. The building was an older, nondescript structure tucked away in the heart of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but that was the point. Maria had always preferred to stay off the radar, keeping her connections and resources as hidden as possible. Keanu had worked with her before, years ago, back when things weren't as complicated, and when his involvement in martial arts and action films hadn't yet put him in the spotlight. She had helped him out of tight spots before, and Keanu was hoping she could do it again. They stepped out of the car, the sound of rain pelting against the pavement. Keanu's mind raced as he approached the door. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on him. The more he thought about the bikers and the men in suits, the more it seemed like they were just pawns in a much larger game. And if that was true, then Keanu had no idea what he was really up against. The door to Maria's apartment clicked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, and there was an undeniable sense of quiet efficiency in the space. Maria had always been a woman who knew how to operate in the shadows, a trait that had served her well in her former line of work. Keanu knocked twice, then waited. It didn't take long for the door to open, revealing a woman in her late 30s with dark, sharp eyes. She was dressed casually, but with the kind of careful attention to detail that betrayed her background. Maria had always been meticulous, and that hadn't changed. "Keanu," she said, her voice low but warm. "It's been a while." "I know," Keanu said, offering a small but genuine smile. "I need your help." Maria stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "Of course. You know I'm not in the business of turning away people I trust. What's going on?" Keanu exchanged a glance with Jack before he spoke. "It's complicated. I've got bikers and men in suits after me, and I don't know why. Someone's pulling the strings, and I need to find out who." Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sounds like you've stepped into something deeper." Then you realized, "But I've got resources. Let's see what we can dig up." She led them to a small room at the back of the apartment, where a large desk was covered with papers, old files, and various electronic devices. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, gadgets, and equipment, everything someone might need to stay one step ahead of the game. Maria sat down at the desk and began to type quickly, her fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced ease. Keanu leaned against the wall, watching her work. He could feel the tension building again. It wasn't just the bikers, and it wasn't just Victor. There were bigger forces at play, and he had no idea how far they went. "I've got a few leads," Maria said after a few minutes, her eyes scanning the screen. "Whoever's after you, they've been doing their homework. They've tracked your movements, your activities. These aren't amateurs." Keanu's stomach tightened. "I figured." Maria looked up from the screen, her expression hardening. "The bikers are just the tip of the iceberg. The real players are much more dangerous, and their reach goes much deeper. It's not just about sending a message. They want something from you, Keanu, and they won't stop until they get it." Jack looked at Keanu, his face full of concern. "What are we talking about here? What's really going on?" Maria stood up and pulled out a file from one of the cabinets. She opened it and spread the papers across the table, revealing a network of names, dates, and connections. Keanu's heart sank as he scanned the papers. This wasn't just a random attack. It was part of something much bigger, something that had been brewing for a long time. "You're not just being targeted for who you are," Maria said quietly. "You're involved in something far bigger than you realize. These people don't play by the same rules, and you're going to have to be smarter than they are if you want to make it out of this alive." Keanu looked at the papers again, his mind processing the web of information before him. It was clear now. This wasn't just about survival. This was about a fight for control, and Keanu wasn't about to lose. The hours that followed felt like an eternity. The darkness of the night seemed to creep into the corners of Keanu's mind as he studied the files Maria had laid out in front of him. The more he read, the more the truth became undeniable. This was no random encounter, no isolated incident. The shadows he was battling were far more intricate than a group of bikers or a few men in suits. This was a well-structured, far-reaching network with influence in places Keanu couldn't even begin to fathom. Maria had been quiet for a long time, letting Keanu absorb the gravity of what was in front of him. Her eyes were sharp as she watched him, knowing how heavy the burden was becoming. She had seen this kind of thing before, people caught in a situation that was far bigger than they realized, and it never ended well for anyone who didn't. "Act fast enough. We're dealing with a criminal syndicate," Maria finally spoke, her voice steady but carrying a weight of certainty. "And not just any group. These guys have ties to everything. Politics, underground dealings, international networks. The bikers you encountered, they're one part of a much larger operation." Keanu's hand hovered over the papers. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else at play here, something personal. It wasn't just about the bikers or the men in suits. It was as if someone had orchestrated all of this with the sole purpose of drawing him into their web. "So, what now?" Jack asked from his place across the room. "We just keep running?" Maria shook her head. "Running isn't going to do much, not now. This isn't just about staying out of their reach. This is about taking control of the situation before they make the first move." Keanu stood up, his face set with determination. "I'm not running. I'm not going to let whoever's behind this get away with it. We need to figure out who they are and stop them before it gets worse." Maria looked at him, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "That's the Keanu I know, but you have to be careful. These people don't make mistakes, and they certainly don't play fair. If you make the wrong move, it could cost you." Keanu's gaze sharpened. "Then we make sure we're the ones pulling the strings." Maria nodded, pulling up a map on her computer. She zoomed in on several key locations scattered around the city, places that had connections to the criminal network she had been able to trace. There was a pattern, a rhythm to their movements. Keanu could almost hear it, like the subtle beats of a drum urging him forward. "These are the locations we need to hit," Maria explained. "They're connected to the syndicate, either by ownership or through fronts they use to launder money. One of them could lead us to the person behind this entire mess." Keanu studied the map carefully, his finger tracing the various locations. His mind was already formulating a plan. He would need to hit these places fast, no hesitation, no second guessing. He would expose them for what they were. Jack stepped closer, leaning over the map. "You sure about this? These aren't just any buildings. Some of them are protected by more than just security guards." Keanu looked up, his expression unwavering. "I've been through worse." Maria shot him a pointed look. "I'm not too so sure. These aren't just ordinary security measures. The kind of people you're dealing with here, they don't just have armed guards. They've got surveillance systems, hired muscle, and people who can disappear without a trace. If you walk in there without a solid plan, you won't make it out." Keanu's mind clicked into high gear. He was used to danger, used to thinking on his feet, but this was different. He had no intention of walking into these locations blindly. He needed intel, he needed support, and most importantly, he needed to stay ahead of them at all costs. "We'll do it in stages," Keanu said, his voice calm but decisive. "We'll gather information, get inside without triggering alarms, one building at a time, and when we know who's at the top, we go after them directly." Maria gave a reluctant nod. "All right, I'll help you, but we do this my way. No, improv. You can't afford to make mistakes." Keanu appreciated her expertise. They had no time to waste. Each minute that passed was another minute. The syndicate could move their operations forward, or worse, come after him. That night, they made their first move. Keanu, Maria, and Jack headed to the first location on the list, a seemingly innocuous office building on the outskirts of the city. The building was small, almost unremarkable, but the file Maria had uncovered showed that it was a front for some of the syndicate's laundering operations. Maria, with her intelligence background, had already managed to hack into the building's security system. Keanu, Jack, and she walked in through a service entrance, their steps silent on the cold concrete floors. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, knowing that the slightest mistake could lead to disaster. The building was empty. At least it seemed that way. The quiet hum of computers and air conditioning filled the air, but there was no one in sight. They made their way up to the third floor, where the syndicate's main operations appeared to be based. Inside the office, they found what they were looking for: files, documents, encrypted computers. Keanu's heart raced. This was the breakthrough they needed. Maria went straight to work, plugging in a small device she had brought along to copy the data. Jack stood guard at the door, his eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. Keanu's fingers drummed against the desk as he glanced at the documents scattered around. As Maria worked quickly, a feeling of unease crept over him. It was too quiet. They had made it in without incident, but something about this place didn't sit right. Keanu's instincts were on edge, and he couldn't shake the sense that they weren't alone. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. They were getting closer. Maria looked up sharply, her face pale. "We need to move now." Keanu didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the files in his hand and shoved them into his jacket as he signaled to Jack. Without another word, they turned and made their way toward the exit. But as they reached the stairwell, the door at the bottom of the stairs burst open. A group of men armed and wearing tactical gear stepped into view. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. They were trapped. The air was thick with tension as Keanu, Maria, and Jack found themselves cornered in the stairwell. The men in tactical gear moved with a purpose, their eyes scanning every inch of the stairwell, their weapons raised and ready. Keanu's mind raced as he calculated his options. There were only two ways out, through them or up. "Stay calm," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Her fingers worked furiously on a small device in her pocket, but Keanu knew it was going to take a miracle to get them out of this situation. One of the men, the leader by the looks of his posture and the way the others deferred to him, took a step forward, his weapon trained directly on Keanu. "You're not going anywhere." Keanu didn't flinch. His black belt in karate wasn't just for show. He had faced far worse odds before, and each time his calm and precision were what got him through. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just a few thugs. This was organized. This was a threat that stretched far beyond anything he had ever faced before. Jack, seeing the situation as dire as it was, whispered to Keanu, "We have to move now." Keanu nodded, his eyes scanning their surroundings, looking for any advantage. The stairwell was narrow, with barely enough space to maneuver. They could either fight their way through or find a way to escape. But given the armed men blocking the exit, the odds of escape were slim. The leader spoke again, his voice cold. "You're making a big mistake, Keanu. We know who you are, and we know what you're capable of. But this time, you won't walk away." Keanu's muscles tensed. He could feel the fight within him stirring, the instinct to protect his friends, to survive, to finish what he had started. But before he could make his move, Maria, ever the quick thinker, dropped the small device in her hand to the ground. With a sharp click, the device whirred to life, sending a powerful jamming signal through the building. The lights flickered, and the security cameras blinked out. The tactical men cursed and began scrambling to regain control of their communication systems. This was their moment. Keanu didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he lunged at the leader, his body flowing into the perfect strike. His fist met the man's chest with the precision of a master, knocking him back against the wall. The impact left the leader momentarily stunned, giving Keanu enough time to step back and assess the situation. Jack, moving with equal speed, tackled one of the other men, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and sending him crashing to the floor. The remaining thugs weren't as coordinated as they thought. Keanu had the upper hand now, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. Maria, standing a few steps behind, moved quickly, her fingers working with practiced ease to disable the security system entirely. She wasn't the physical fighter Keanu was, but she was a strategist. Her skills with technology were invaluable. Within moments, the entire building's surveillance was offline, and their chances of escaping grew exponentially. Keanu moved, with deadly precision, taking down another man with a quick roundhouse kick that sent him sprawling onto the stairs. Each strike was calculated, each movement deliberate. But it wasn't just about knocking them out. It was about sending a message. Keanu wasn't some actor you could intimidate. He wasn't someone who'd back down because things got tough. The remaining men, realizing they were outmatched, tried to regroup. They fumbled for their radios, calling for reinforcements, but Maria had already jammed the signal. For the first time, they were completely on their own. Keanu looked at Jack and nodded. "Let's finish this." Jack, already picking himself up from the ground, grinned. "Ready when you are." The remaining men lunged, but Keanu was faster. His martial arts training kicked into overdrive. A swift jab to one man's throat dropped him instantly, and before another could react, Keanu disarmed him, sending his weapon skittering across the floor. Jack was just as efficient, taking down the last two attackers with a flurry of punches that sent them crashing into the stairwell wall. With all the men incapacitated, Keanu breathed a quick sigh of relief. The danger wasn't over, but now they had gained the upper hand. Maria quickly scanned the area. "We need to get out of here before reinforcements show up. It's not safe." Keanu nodded. "Agreed. Let's go." They moved swiftly, taking the stairs two at a time. exiting through the back of the building into an alleyway. The rain had picked up again, but that didn't matter. What mattered now was getting to safety and making sure they had the information they came for. The syndicate was growing more dangerous with every passing moment, and Keanu couldn't afford to slow down. Once they were clear of the building, Maria pulled out her phone and quickly dialed a number. Keanu was still processing everything that had happened, trying to make sense of the chaos. His body was still buzzing with adrenaline, but the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Whoever was behind this had resources that extended far beyond a few thugs in tactical gear. Maria ended the call and looked at Keanu with a mixture of determination and concern. "We've got the intel we need, but we have to act fast. We can't let this go on any longer." Jack wiped the rain off his face, his expression hardening. "This isn't just about you anymore, Keanu. This is bigger. These people are pulling strings and we've just barely scratched the surface." Keanu turned to face his friends, his resolve solidifying. "I know, and I'm not backing down. We'll stop them. But we need to know everything. Who's at the top, who's pulling the strings, and why me? This doesn't end until we've gotten every answer." Maria nodded. "I can get us more intel. But we're going to need more than just a few good hits. If we're going after them, we need a plan that goes deeper." Keanu smiled grimly. "I've faced worse. We'll be ready." As they walked into the night, the city seemed quieter than before. The rain began to slow, and for a brief moment, Keanu allowed himself to breathe. He had won this round, but the battle was far from over. Whoever was behind this wasn't just going to give up. And Keanu wasn't going to stop until he'd taken them down, one step at a time. The following days were a blur. Keanu, Maria, and Jack worked relentlessly to track down every lead they could find. Each new piece of information brought them closer to the heart of the criminal network, but it also revealed just how vast and powerful their enemies were. This wasn't just about the bikers. It was about something much deeper, something that reached into places Keanu couldn't have imagined. Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching, always one step ahead. Despite their careful planning, every time they made a move, it seemed as though the syndicate had already anticipated it. The tension was suffocating. Every corner they turned led to more dead ends, more silence, more shadows. But then came the breakthrough. Maria had spent hours going through encrypted data, risking everything, to uncover the syndicate's true leader. She had hacked into systems, tracked down financial records, and painstakingly pieced together bits of intelligence from the locations they had infiltrated. One name kept popping up, hidden in codes, in shadowy corners of the dark web, and in encrypted communications, a name that, when Keanu heard it, sent a chill through his spine. Victor Renard. Keanu's hand clenched around the edge of the desk. The name was familiar, too familiar. It wasn't just some faceless criminal. Victor Renard had been a name in the martial arts world years ago, a man who had once been on the same circuit as Keanu, though he'd vanished from the scene without a trace. Renard had been known for his ruthless fighting style, a man who played dirty and didn't mind bending the rules. Keanu had crossed paths with him once, a quick fight in a tournament that Keanu had easily won. But Renard hadn't taken defeat lightly. That had been the last time Keanu had seen him until now. "This doesn't make sense," Keanu muttered, his mind racing. "I thought he disappeared years ago. How is he involved in this?" Maria met his gaze, her expression grave. "Looks like he didn't disappear. He's been building an empire. And now it's clear he's not just pulling the strings, he's the one behind all of this. The bikers, the underground dealings, the international operations, they all answer to him." Keanu sat back in his chair, the weight of the revelation sinking in. This was personal. Renard wasn't just some faceless villain. He was someone Keanu had faced in the past, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to come back into Keanu's life with a vengeance. "We need to find him," Keanu said, determination flooding his veins. "I don't care where he's hiding. I'm going after him." Maria nodded, pulling up a map of possible locations where Renard might be hiding. "I can get you close, but you'll have to do the rest. You won't be able to take him down alone, though, not this time." Keanu's eyes narrowed. I don't care how many men he has. I'll do whatever it takes. The plan was set. Keanu would head to a remote mansion located on the outskirts of the city, one that Maria had pinpointed as Renard's possible hideout. It was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and nearly impossible to access without detection. But that was exactly what made it the perfect place for someone like Victor Renard to operate out of. It wasn't just about hiding, it was about power. Keanu wasn't the only one with a past. Renard had likely chosen this location because it represented everything he stood for: control, isolation, and dominance. Keanu, Jack, and Maria made their way to the mansion, the sense of urgency growing with each passing mile. They couldn't afford to let Renard slip through their fingers again. Keanu wasn't going to let his past haunt him any longer. This time, he was going to end it, once and for all. The drive was long, the road twisting through dense woods that seemed to swallow the car whole. As they neared the mansion, Keanu could feel the tension building. There was no turning back now. His fists clenched, and his mind went into overdrive, running through every possible outcome, every possible fight. But it wasn't just about the physical battle, it was about facing the ghosts of his past and taking control of his future. When they arrived at the mansion, the sun had just set, casting an eerie glow over the building. It was a towering structure, with large windows that reflected the last light of the day. There were no guards visible, no signs of life, but Keanu knew better than to trust appearances. Jack checked his gear, then turned to Keanu. "We go in quiet. We move fast. We find Renard and we end this." Keanu nodded, his focus absolute. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, but there was no fear, only resolve. This was the end of the road, one way or another. They made their way toward the mansion's entrance, using the cover of darkness to stay hidden. As they approached, Keanu heard the faintest sound: footsteps. They were not alone. "Stay low," Keanu whispered, signaling for them to take cover behind a large stone pillar near the front entrance. They waited in silence, the tension thick in the air. Then, the door to the mansion creaked open, and Keanu's heart skipped a beat. A shadow stepped out from the doorway. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that billowed behind him. It was Renard. Keanu's pulse quickened. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Renard was here, and this time he wouldn't escape. The moment stretched on, each heartbeat echoing in Keanu's chest as he watched Victor Renard step into the dim light of the mansion's entrance. His tall, imposing figure seemed to absorb the darkness around him, as if the shadows were a part of him. His face, weathered and hardened by years of conflict, twisted into a smirk as he stepped forward, as if he had known Keanu would come for him all along. "You've come a long way, Keanu." Renard's voice was cold, carrying a familiar malice. "I knew it wouldn't take long for you to figure out I was behind all this, but you, of all people, should have known better. You're nothing compared to me now." Keanu's hands clenched at his sides, every muscle in his body tense. The memories of their past clash flashed in his mind: the tournament, the brutal fight, the victory that Renard had never accepted. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was personal. Renard had been waiting for this moment just as much as Keanu had, but this time, Keanu wasn't the same man who had walked into that ring years ago. He was stronger, sharper, more prepared. "You've been hiding in the shadows for too long, Victor," Keanu said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here to end this. No more games, no more running." Renard's laugh was short and mocking. "End it? You really think you can end me? You were never a threat to me, Keanu. You never understood what it takes to truly lead, to control everything around you." Before Keanu could respond, Renard made a swift motion, and the mansion's front door swung wide open. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Keanu's eyes quickly scanned the area, and within seconds, several armed men stepped into view, their weapons aimed at Keanu, Jack, and Maria. Keanu's heart sank. Renard wasn't alone. This was a trap. "We've been waiting for this moment too," Renard sneered, stepping toward them with slow, deliberate steps. "You should have stayed out of it, Keanu. But now you've made your choice, and I'm not the only one who's going to take pleasure in ending you." Jack immediately pulled out his weapon, But Keanu held up a hand, stopping him. "Not yet," Keanu muttered, his mind racing. This wasn't a gunfight. It never would be. They had to face Renard on their terms in a way that would ensure his downfall, not just a simple victory. Keanu's black belt in karate wasn't just for show. This was the moment where all his years of training, all his discipline would come into play. The rain began to fall harder, soaking the three of them as they stood before Renard and his men. Keanu's gaze locked with Renard's, and for a moment it was as though the world stood still. Everything else faded away, leaving just the two of them. "This ends now, Renard," Keanu said with finality. "You can't hide behind these men forever." Renard's eyes narrowed and his smirk deepened. "You think you can stop me? You're just one man, Keanu. What difference can you make?" In an instant, Renard lunged toward him, his fist aimed directly at Keanu's chest. Keanu was ready. With a swift movement, he sidestepped, narrowly avoiding Renard's strike, and delivered a powerful elbow to Renard's back, sending him stumbling forward. But Renard wasn't finished. With a snarl, he spun around, his legs sweeping out in a low kick aimed at Keanu's knees. Keanu blocked it with ease, his body moving instinctively. It was clear Renard's fighting style hadn't changed. Ruthless, aggressive, always pushing the limit. But Keanu had the advantage this time. His movements were more precise, his instincts sharper. He stepped forward, landing a series of rapid strikes to Renard's torso, each punch a reminder of their past rivalry. Renard grunted with each blow, his smug expression beginning to crack. Keanu was relentless, never allowing him a chance to recover. But Renard was no slouch. He blocked one of Keanu's kicks and swept his legs out from under him, sending Keanu to the ground. Before Keanu could recover, Renard was on him, pinning him down with his knees and pressing a sharp elbow to his throat. Keanu struggled to breathe, but his focus remained clear. He wasn't going to lose, not now, not after everything. With a grunt of effort, Keanu planted his feet firmly and pushed Renard off with all his strength. Renard stumbled backward, and Keanu wasted no time. He was up on his feet in an instant, his fist already in motion. The punch that followed was a blur, Keanu's right hook landing squarely on Renard's jaw. The force of the hit sent Renard reeling backward, his feet losing contact with the ground as he crashed into the mansion's stone wall. Keanu wasn't giving him a chance to recover. He closed the distance, launching himself at Renard with a flurry of precise, well-executed strikes. His fists, his legs, everything he had learned over the years poured into every movement. With one final bone-crushing kick to Renard's ribs, Keanu sent him crumpling to the ground. Renard's breath came in short, labored gasps as he struggled to rise, but it was clear he was beaten. His body was bruised, bloodied, and he was no longer the same man who had once challenged Keanu. Renard was no longer the threat he had once been. Keanu stood over him, panting but resolute. "It's over, Renard. You're done." Maria and Jack stepped forward, their weapons lowered but ready. Renard glared up at Keanu, his eyes filled with hatred, but there was no strength left in his gaze. He had been bested, and he knew it. "You may have won today, Keanu," Renard hissed, his voice barely a whisper, "but there are others. There are always others." Keanu's expression remained unyielding. "Then I'll take them down too, one by one." With that, Renard slumped, defeated, his empire crumbling before him. Keanu turned to Maria and Jack, his eyes meeting theirs. The fight wasn't over. But this chapter had come to a close. The three of them stood together, watching as the rain continued to pour down, cleansing the night of all that had transpired. The storm wasn't just in the sky, it was in their hearts. But it had passed. For now, they had won.